Okay, thank you. And thank you so much to the organizers for this invitation. And it's really a pleasure to be here to share some perspectives from a topic I'm very passionate about, international law. And I'm speaking today in my personal capacity and not on behalf of any institution, but I'm speaking from my experiences in various international organizations in The Hague, in New York, Geneva, and elsewhere. So I want to share some thoughts today on how contemporary international law might be a source of inspiration and might give us some insights in terms of what it is to be human in the 21st century and how we might define our common future together. So today it's a truism, it's very well known that we live in an interconnected world. Our personal lives, our families, businesses are connected to multiple countries at the global level. Just by using the internet, for example, we can be connected to jurisdictions around the world. However, despite this reality, the general public around the world doesn't necessarily know the fundamental tenets of the international legal system, and international law remains something quite remote to ordinary citizens. So what it is to be human and in particular what it is to form an international legal order based on the rule of law. So who are we? So firstly, I'll share this quote from Hans Kelsen, who suggested that law is essentially an order for the promotion of peace. Its purpose is to assure the peaceful living together of a group of individuals in such a way that they settle their conflicts in a peaceful manner. That is, without the use of force, in conformity with an order valid for all. This order is the law. So we take this principle of the rule of law for granted in national systems. For example, in Canada, where I was raised, or in the Netherlands, where I now live, we expect that there will, for example, in general, be the laws of the land enforced. There will be criminal prosecutions. However, when Hans Kelsen made this comment, it was in a series of lectures at Harvard Law School in 1940 and 41, he noted in the international legal order, it still did not represent the characteristics of a general system of international rule of law that we would find in a domestic system. So he noted how the international legal system was primitive, in fact, a primitive legal order or not a legal order at all, where states, for example, would use force and violence against each other to redress a wrong. So if we indeed want to see an international legal order that is peaceful, we might be interested in this fact that there's still much work to be done to produce an international system based on the rule of law. So next, moving to the international in international law. As you would guess from the word, international means regulating the conduct between or among states, nation states. And it is this classical sense of international law that gives it the sense of being something remote from our personal lives, something cold and distant. And this is indeed the classical sense of international law, that it should regulate conduct among sovereign states. However, in the contemporary international legal world, we have more and more the individual becoming an actor, a subject and object of international law. So, for example, there are individual complaint mechanisms to a number of the core international human rights treaties. At the International Criminal Court, individuals will be tried for international crimes. So also, the general public around the world, we might be very concerned about various issues, for example, climate change or the conflict in Syria, where international law might be the only mechanism to solve these issues. So I'm now going to very briefly turn to a few international legal institutions that are often doing excellent work behind the scenes. And again, we don't see the work of these organizations featured very commonly in the media. So firstly is the Hague Conference on Private International Law, founded in 1893, which really established The Hague as an international capital of peace and justice. And the Hague Conference involves nation states coming together and negotiating treaties in the broad area of private international law, which includes international legal cooperation, child and family law, and civil and commercial litigation. And again, you may not be aware of these treaties, but they can have very tangible, concrete effects on individual lives of families. Also, for example, there are modern treaties on international parental child abduction, and also on child support and family maintenance in cross-border situations. So whether a state is party and signed up to one of these international treaties can have very concrete effects on individual and family life. Now I turn next to these words. I wonder if any of you recognize these beautiful and soul-stirring words. To save succeeding generation from the scourge of war, which twice in our lifetime has brought untold sorrow, to reaffirm faith in fundamental human rights, in the dignity and worth of the human person, to establish conditions under which justice and respect for the obligations arising from treaties and other sources of international law can be maintained, to promote social progress and better standards of life, to practice tolerance and live together in peace with one another as good neighbors. Does anybody recognize these words? Not so much. These are in fact words from the preamble of the United Nations Charter, adopted in 1945, indeed after 2 horrifying world wars. And the preamble, these words in fact begin with "we the peoples of the United Nations." And because virtually every state in the world is party to the UN Charter, 193 states, "we the peoples" refers to all of us. And the Charter is, in effect, a sort of constitutional document as it prevails over other international treaty obligations. And the Charter, its inception, the wisdom of the drafters of this instrument in 1945, meant to fundamentally reform and change interstate relations, and in particular to transform states' use of violence and force between each other. So the Charter established a binding system of collective security, and also its Chapter 6 on the peaceful settlement of international disputes, which of course, again, we do not hear about very much. We're not educated on this chapter on peaceful settlement of disputes. And this was really an attempt, again, to find safety for all peoples, to prevent the scourge of war to recur. Next, I'll turn to the International Court of Justice, which was established at the time of the UN Charter with the objective to be the principal judicial organ for the United Nations to resolve disputes between states. However, more than 20 years after the adoption of the Charter, only 72 states out of the 193 United Nations members have accepted the compulsory jurisdiction of the court. And this is despite multiple UN statements on the rule of law, encouraging states around the world to accept the compulsory jurisdiction of the court. And indeed, although it's a working court, it issues judgments which states in general comply with. The former president of the ICJ, Justice Rosalind Higgins, she echoes Kelson's idea that the fundamental principles of domestic rule of law models do not fit easily within the international legal order. For example, the ICJ lacks compulsory jurisdiction, there's uneven and ineffective enforcement of international law, and a lack of clear hierarchy among international courts. So again, what does this mean for individual citizens? Well, if there is an interlinkage between rule of law and peace, as Kelson noted, if we want a sustainable international peace, there's still progress to be made and much work to be done. So next, I'll turn to a very stunning, quite a striking development in the international legal order, which happened in 2002, which is the establishment of the International Criminal Court in The Hague. So the ICC is a permanent international criminal court to prosecute individuals who are responsible for international crimes of the highest concern to the international community as a whole, including genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and the crime of aggression. So in response to the crimes and the atrocities committed in the course of the 20th century after the Second World War, you might be familiar with the two tribunals, the Nuremberg and Tokyo tribunals that were established to try war criminals. And after those prosecutions, in 1948, when the General Assembly adopted the Genocide Convention, there was already a call and a recognition that we needed a permanent international criminal court. However, it wasn't until the 1990s when, with the former Yugoslavia and Rwanda atrocities, that the UN Security Council stepped in and provided for 2 ad hoc tribunals to address those situations, and then that helped to catalyze a convening of states to negotiate the Rome Statute to establish the International Criminal Court in 1998. So this institution has a bit more momentum than the ICJ, and there are today 124 countries which have accepted the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. And countries are engaged from around the world. For example, 34 of those countries are African states, 19 Asia Pacific, Eastern Europe, Latin America, Western Europe, etc. So this court has really extraordinary international engagement to uphold the basic tenets of humanity. So lastly, my final example I'll share with you today is the recent adoption of the Sustainable Development Goals, which were unanimously adopted by every country in the world that's a member of the United Nations, all 193 in 2015. And these goals also contain detailed 169 targets. And these goals are extraordinary. As you see, the breadth and diversity of the goals, and they're trying to get at the roots of poverty in a global collaborative effort. And not only do the goals seek to eradicate poverty, but to build economic growth in a sustainable fashion, but also address issues of social inclusion like health, education, social protection, and job opportunities. And one of the mottos with the goals is that no individual should be left behind, that these should work for all societies across the world, and they apply to countries no matter what their state of economic development is. So just to give you a sense of some of the texture of some of the goals and targets, and as we're at an institution of higher learning, I'll just focus for a minute on a few of the targets under Goal 4, Quality Education. So this goal and targets mandate that states will ensure that all girls and boys complete free, equitable, and quality primary and secondary education, that all girls and boys have access to quality early childhood development care and primary education, that all women and men have access to affordable and quality technical, vocational, and tertiary education, including universities, so the full range of education across an individual's life cycle. And lastly, this target, which I find particularly inspiring, to ensure that all learners, and again, that's all of us, all around the world, all of us are learners by nature, that we all acquire the knowledge and skills needed to promote sustainable development, including through education for sustainable development, human rights, gender equality, promotion of a culture of peace and nonviolence. Again, you see the echoing of the key tenets of the UN Charter, global citizenship, and appreciation of cultural diversity and culture's contribution to sustainable development. So the goals here show a full circle with a call to civic duty and formation of our shared values together. So I don't know how you feel about these goals, if you're familiar with them and those targets, for example, but I find that these goals are incredibly idealistic as well as ambitious. And if we imagine how the world would be transformed if any of these goals were met by 2030, or even just those targets under education, we would see a transformed world. So everybody is supposed to be engaged in implementing these goals, including governments have primary responsibility, but also the private sector, civil society, and also individuals, people like you and I. So in sum, what does international law, modern international law, say about being human in the 21st century? So firstly, we are all stakeholders in the international legal order, whether we are fully aware of it or not. We are named and we're invited to be involved and to contribute. We are all part of the process also of the further development of the international order based on the shared values which we define, we the peoples. And indeed, in the lead up to the SDGs, there was a broad consultation with civil society groups. And we all, by default, because of our interconnection globally, we have a stake in the success or the imperfections of the international legal order. And I would argue that our predecessors, as you see here, Tobias Asser, who was fundamental to the Hague, establishing the Hague Conference in 1893 and inaugurating The Hague as a city, an international legal capital and a city of peace and justice, and Eleanor Roosevelt, who was instrumental in finalizing the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I would argue that there are very compelling ideas and extremely strong foundations upon which the current international system rests. And the foundations are the result of collaborative efforts and great collective exertions over many years. So all of these international treaties, the institutions, the ongoing work behind the scenes show our cooperative nature as human beings, and they signal the human capacity, the very strong human capacity for collaboration. And indeed, Gandhi made the comment that often it is vastly, grossly overlooked, our capacity as humans for collaboration and these social bonds of love. We tend to focus on the conflict, but we actually have incredible capacities for collaboration despite great human diversity. So lastly, I will end with this beautiful image of the Peace Palace in The Hague, which houses the International Court of Justice and other key international institutions. And I'll end with a quote from Andrew Carnegie, who's the noted Scottish-American industrialist and philanthropist who, like Eleanor Roosevelt, very much believed in hard work and in working for international peace and a viable international order. And his gift, his financial gift, enabled the building of the Peace Palace as it stands today in The Hague. And in his autobiography, Carnegie called the Peace Palace, quote, the most holy building in the world because it has the holiest end in view. He said, I do not even accept St. Peter's Cathedral or any building erected to the glory of God, whom we cannot serve or aid. God needs no help from us, but the highest worship is service to man. So I'll just end by saying that we're all very, very privileged to live in an age when we can meaningfully contribute and engage in furthering this collective process of international law and international order in a way that our predecessors cannot imagine or could not have imagined. Thank you very much.